Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about our friend, the Sega Dreamcast, and kind of awesome. We've been doing a lot of Dreamcast videos lately. It's been just like this great resurgence in Dreamcast energy, and makes my heart feel good. All right, but before we do that, though, obviously, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. I've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel. I appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. Right, so our friend, the Sega Dreamcast. Today, we are actually not talking about a new game. We're talking about a new accessory for it. Now I say new in quotations because if I'm totally honest with you, this thing has existed for over a year publicly in public hands, and even before that in, you know, trials, and I think it's been public knowledge for like 3 years now, so this is not really new. It's just new to me in the sense that I finally have one, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about it. But I should also extend this warning here. Because it's been out so long, there's been so many videos done on it, especially technical ones of like, here's the minutia of how to set it up and every little feature, etc., etc. I'm probably not going to cover a whole lot of that because I'm not really bringing anything new to the table in that case, which is a literal table in this case. People always wonder if this is like a bed or something. I don't know why people ask that, but no, it's a table. And so I thought I would just kind of, I think, approach this from the angle of what does this do to fulfill a childhood, shall we say, promise or encouragement from Sega. That's what we're going to kind of do. And obviously we'll talk a little bit about like what I ultimately think of it and all that. If you don't care about any of that and you're just like, yeah, what's the review? Skip ahead to this time code. But otherwise, stick around and we will talk all about the what is this thing and why does it exist. So full disclosure on this. This was sent to me for free for the purpose of review by my boy Chris from Greece. And if you're interested in it, I'll put a link in the description. You can check it out and get one for yourself. It's not the first time. Chris is not a stranger to this channel. I actually reviewed his DreamCon, which was a wireless Dreamcast controller years ago. He had sent me like an early prototype of it, and it was a fun, you know, wireless controller. And still, because I don't think Retrobit ever actually dropped theirs, his remains the only one of the OEM like Dreamcast style controller that is wireless, at least at the time of this video. So he's been doing other projects. I know he also worked on I think it was there was a Dreamcast light gun he worked on and stuff like that. This one is to address another hardware accessory, and that's kind of what I'm going off on here, is that I love that there has been this weird resurgence in Dreamcast energy. You know, it's not just games. There's also people working on new accessories and stuff. It's like the generation of kids that really fell in love with the Dreamcast, such as me at the time. A lot of you, not me, got real jobs and became engineers and had real skills and decided we're going to bring back our childhood in that way. And the best I can do is just talk about it, which is not nothing, I think, but you know, it's kind of nothing, let's be fair. But all the same, I'm just glad that, you know, there's so many people out there that are that into the Dreamcast. Semper Fi. Okay, now let's go ahead and open it up. So it's packed well enough. Like I said, it comes from Greece, and again, a full disclosure, it was sent for free for the purpose of review. Okay, so inside, oh wow, I didn't know. Okay, so first of all, the box art is nice. I really like it. It's very so Sega originally did like the VMU in like a blister pack, and then later they released it in this kind of very similar box style, and he has very much emulated that look. This is the VM2. We're gonna leave it boxed up here for a few minutes. In fact, it's worth noting this is a blue version. I didn't even know he made a blue one. I thought he only did a black and a white one, so that's really cool. So what is it? It's a VMU, sort of. Let's go back in time and talk about this. This is the VMU that Sega originally created for our friend the Sega Dreamcast. Now, I need you to understand that I am a 38-year-old man, and I remember vividly the era in which this thing came into existence. So if you are like Gen Z or whatever and you can't remember that, let me paint you a picture of why this was so bizarre and filled with potential that was sadly just very unrealized. In around 1998, the Sega... Well, okay, in 1998, there was like a perfect storm. It was the end of the Michael Jordan Bulls, you know, rest in peace, the Last Dance dynasty. I'm from Chicago, I have to celebrate that. But also a lot of other things were going on. Pokemon had exploded in its popularity, which never really subsided, but that's really kind of like around there is when it came into its being. Portable gaming was super significant, but Sega wasn't really participating in it. Tamagotchis were all the craze, and Sega needed a new console. So when you kind of bring all that together, minus the Michael Jordan stuff, obviously, that's how you got the VMU. Sega basically looks at all these trends and goes, okay, the Game Gear did not do what we wanted, and we have not continued in any handheld legacy. The Nomad was not meant to be that, and it didn't work out anyway, so we're not going to get directly up against Nintendo with handhelds. We just can't do that. We're hemorrhaging money on the Saturn, etc. We got to kind of focus a different direction here. That was one element of it. Like I said, things like Pokemon was doing really well, and that was doing well for Nintendo through the Game Boy, but one thing that proved was the idea of like linking systems together and what kind of connectivity you could have. Maybe it's trading characters, having cross battles, whatever it is, whatever game-specific content you had, the idea of connecting the two systems to have some sort of interactivity was proving a successful model on the playground where it really was important. And then you had things like the Tamagotchis. I cannot stress how much of a national plague that was. It was kind of like Beanie Babies, where it just kind of showed up, took the entire country by storm for a while, and then faded away. But that in that phase of where it was successful, that's when Sega was working on this. And Tamagotchis wasn't just the U.S. Like that kind of, obviously, it came from Japan, and it did well across most of the Western world. I know it was popular here. I'm sure it was in Canada, parts of Europe, etc. Probably Australia too, I would imagine. Point is, Sega looks at all these things and says, what if we coalesce all that? Basically, Tamagotchis had proved that simplistic games on the go could totally work, and you could get people super interested in that. And Pokemon had proved the value of connectivity. And of course, Sega, from their own internal perspective, was like, it would be really nice to kind of have something we can call a portable console that we can make titles for, etc., and add additional value proposition to our new console, the Sega Dreamcast. And to that end, that's how you got the VMU. The VMU not only functioned as a memory card, it functioned effectively as a portable handheld game console-ish. Now, for those who don't know what a memory card is, I don't know why you're watching this video if you don't know, but like we will explain. Basically, back in the olden days, when you're playing a game and you have to save your progress, it did not auto-save to some internal hard drive or a cloud or whatever. You had to save it to an external memory source. This is that. So your game data saves, you're playing Sonic Adventure, Shenmue, whatever it is. If you're saving your progress, all right, then I got to turn the console off and go do my homework or whatever. It goes on to this. That was the whole idea. So it functioned in multiple ways. So as they're teasing us with the system, as it's getting closer, they're talking more about this, and they're showing it to us, and they're saying, you're going to be able to do all this cool stuff. Now, no kid, even of that age, my age, mind you, at the time, looked at this and said, oh, this is a more advanced display than the Game Boy. We didn't care, though. You have to understand that did not matter. Like, Game Boy Color was only a relatively recent thing and was seen more as a novelty. Again, we weren't quite as spoiled as we are now, but we're looking there and going like, that would be totally fine. And one thing they kept telling us was, the Dreamcast, you wouldn't have to buy games specifically for this. There's no cartridges or anything that goes into these. Instead, rather, what you would have to do is you'd be playing a new game, and then those new games had special mini games in them that you could only play on the VMU. So if you went out and bought Sonic Adventure, you're playing that game at home, you're having a great time, there's a mini game in there you can send to the VMU and play on the go. And that mini game, naturally, because of Tamagotchis, was very inspired by Tamagotchis. That's where you take care of a chow with like a little egg and you raise it as a digital pet. It's the same exact idea, which is like really gives away the whole ball game of what Sega was thinking. But that was just one example. There were other games. Power Stone was a cool one because Power Stone's a like cool fighting game for the Dreamcast, like 3D fighting game. And it had a mini game in it made by Capcom where it would just send it to the VMU, and it's basically it's a piloting game. I kind of you know, I kind of remember it being a shoot 'em up, but then I think it wasn't actually. I think it was just like you were just piloting left and right and avoiding stuff. The games were simplistic. But the idea was you would have additional value. And then you would go to school and you could sit there and play your game, you know, on the bus, in the car, on recess, maybe even in class if nobody's looking. Like, you were going to be the cool kid who could do that. That was kind of the vibe. Again, this is a pre-smartphone era, so this is what you have. And the idea was that on the playground, right, or whatever, like, if there was some big game, say a Pokemon-like game, you could take the lid off here, there's connectivity, and you could connect two VMUs together and share data. Or you could have little battles or whatever, okay? You understand what I'm saying. There was a lot of potential in this. And that doesn't even include the potential that was within the standalone games on the system. So, because it had an additional screen, effectively, within the controller, once you plug this into the controller, you have an extra screen. Now, granted, the screen, it's not the Wii U, it's not like a one-to-one screen, etc., but that doesn't mean it couldn't do anything. So some games took advantage of this and some did not. A lot of games, honestly, just kind of showed you like a fancy little display logo. Maybe it cycles around between different characters or something, and they didn't really do anything else with it. Whereas other games actually took advantage of it. Like I've mentioned this in the past. I'm obviously not a fan of hand egg, aka football. But I will admit I respect the way the Dreamcast did this, because it doesn't really matter now in like multiplayer because everybody plays online anyway. But back in the day of local multiplayer, you have 4 controllers, ports for a reason. You could play on the TV with your friends. You all get together, you get some pizza, you know, Blockbuster night, whatever it is, and you have the multiple people playing. If it's something like a hand egg football game, if you're gonna get your plays together. Football, it's an important strategy that you come up with a play and that your opponent doesn't know what it is. But in a video game version, that's impossible to avoid, because the only way for the game to give the information to the player is to display it on the television. But if it's multiple people playing it, you can literally just look at each other's plays and see what the other team is going to do. The VMU presented the possibility that they didn't have to do that. They could just show you the play on the VMU, so you could just look down at your screen. Only you knew what you were going to do. It made the games more interesting. Or it could also be useful and efficient. So, for example, the Resident Evil games, which were by no means exclusive to the Dreamcast, had an exclusive feature in them, which was that your health would be displayed on the screen at all times. That's useful because if you've ever played those games, you'll know when you get injured in the game, there's nothing on the screen telling you that you're injured. You basically have to go into, other than the character maybe walks a little weird, but you have to go into like the menu and see what your health status is. It takes time. It's an extra step. Whereas this, you could just glance down, oh, it says I'm fine, and just proceed onward. Stuff like that. Now, unfortunately, the Dreamcast was not around long enough to fully utilize this, and sadly, I don't think a lot of the indie games really take advantage of this, and I think it all boils down to the kryptonite that was the VMU. Because as great as this all sounds, I mean, think about how awesome all of that actually is, especially to like a 9-year-old at the time. Why didn't this work? Well, it had some flaws. First of all, the screen was not backlit, which was totally tolerable at the time because, I mean, the Game Boy wasn't backlit. Sure, the Game Gear was, but, you know, it was understandable. It wasn't even that a lot of developers didn't support it, because initially a lot did. Keep in mind the lifespan of the Dreamcast, officially anyway, was relatively short. No. The flaw, the ultimate thing that absolutely killed this, was the batteries. So on the back, you will notice it says CR2032, which is a battery that it requires. It's like a little silver, like coin-like battery. It's a watch battery, commonly referred to as. Now, each one of these VMUs came with one of those, and there was right there's a little hole, and there would be a little plastic tab, and as soon as you pulled that out, it would go beep, and it would basically allow connection between the battery and the system, and then the device would fire up, and you'd put in your calendar, all your settings, etc., etc. All good, right? The problem is the battery life was a joke. And I mean a joke. If you pulled that out and you actually decided to sit here and just play with it, just play, like until it ran out, you are talking maybe 4 to 5 hours before it's dead. 4 to 5 hours. Not days, not weeks, not months, not years, hours. And that's, to be fair, if you actually kept it on the whole time. Now, if you didn't, if you just kind of casually used it between, you know, oh, I played for a second, I downloaded the game, let me check in my time, I got you, everything's fine, let me turn it off again, whatever. If you did that, I swear, I remember doing this, you'd get like maybe a week or two tops before the battery was just dead again. And like so much so that I actually remember us trying this. Like a few of my buddies and I, it was probably in 2000. Yes, it goes back that far. Here's something depressing. The Dreamcast is over a quarter of a century old. And if you have a bunch of VMUs laying around that go back that far, you potentially have saves on there that are over that age. It's fun being old, doesn't it? Anyway, I remember us back in 2000, a couple of my buddies and I, we were doing exactly what Sega said we should do, which was, you know, bring the VMUs to school and we'll try to trade saves. Like my friend had managed to beat this one level on a thing or something like that, and I wanted to transfer it because I wanted to see what comes after that level. You know, stuff like that, right? Because you could transfer saves between these things too. So we bring it to school, right? And we tried to do that at recess. And both of ours had been working at the beginning of the day. We get to recess, and he can't get his to turn on because the battery's dead. Mine goes on, and I was like, all right, so maybe we're trying to look around, see if we can find another battery, which, of course, is ridiculous on a recess at a school. But then while we're doing that, mine dies. And so you never actually got to do that, at least not successfully. And you can see why that would be frustrating, especially to someone who's like 9 or 10 years old, because you don't have spare batteries and you need to go buy them, which means you now need to spend money, and you just got your parents to buy you this thing, and now you're asking for money for batteries for something you know only lasts for a few hours. And on top of that, the battery replacement isn't even that easy. It requires a screwdriver. You know what I mean? Like this, it almost looks like Sega designed it to just be like, yeah, don't worry about that, it'll be fine, just leave it alone, have your dad do it or something. But no, you got to do it. So you see where I'm going with this. The VMU, great idea, poor execution. And it really is unfortunate that Sega didn't do, I don't know how much they could have done with this technologically speaking in 1998, but if they had nailed the battery technology in this thing in the time, I feel like that might have saved the Dreamcast. Like the potential that was in there was unreal. And the idea was great, poor execution. Now, what if we maybe address something? It's too late to save the Dreamcast in that regard, but it's not too late to have that type of VMU experience necessarily. Enter the VM2. Now, the VM2 by Chris obviously uses modern technology to try and address as many of those problems as possible. Let's go ahead and open it up first. So I love the box. Like I said, the front says Dreamware Entertainment, the absolute mods for your Dreamcast. Shows the blue VMU or VM2. Visual Memory 2, which I think is a nice little pun, as it were, because it rhymes and everything. And then you go to dreammods.net for any additional information. By the way, that's also the website that will have the GUI that you need for Windows to update the system and the firmware and all that sort of fun stuff. On the back, more than a memory card. Complete with its own backlit LCD and controller buttons, the VM2 can play self-contained VMU games, like I said, Sonic Adventure, minigame, Power Stone minigame, whatever. Display secret info during Dreamcast play. I assume that just he's referring to like the little icons and stuff that pop up there, but I guess I don't know. Download and modify characters from Dreamcast games. So that one's interesting because the card, so one of the features, that this goes all the way back to some of the weird like Chinese third-party stuff that actually came out when the Dreamcast was relevant. It was proven very easy, very early on in the Dreamcast lifespan, that if you got the data off of VMU to a PC, there was apps you could use to kind of modify the data so you could extract individual save files or dump new save files to the card, etc. Basically, you could bring stuff to the PC back and forth for whatever purposes. He's basically saying, yeah, we made this a breeze now. And then, which is, yeah, very cool. You can use micro SD cards to extend the memory for managing multiple VMUs. We'll get back to that. Connect to a PC for managing internal memory or stream during gameplay. The streaming thing doesn't mean much to me, but what you can do with it is if you stream games online or whatever, you can use the VM2 to just display the logo as like, you know, part of the box or window within your games. And yeah, there's additional functionality within that. It uses USB-C for charging, and of course it saves Dreamcast files. I do want to give a little shout out here before we continue with this to say to Sega themselves, they were aware of this problem. They figured it out pretty quick. They just didn't have a great solution to it, and it's important to understand this because unfortunately this is kind of also how the VM2 and any other memory card would work on the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast individual memory card has, I believe it's 192 kilobytes of storage, which is not a lot of data. Technically, there's a little bit more. But Sega did not measure the internal memory by kilobytes. They basically measured it in their own system called blocks. And to that end, they had 200 blocks per memory card. That number is extremely important because that is the only number the Dreamcast can ever recognize. You cannot make a Dreamcast memory card that has 10 million blocks, where it's just one long page with just infinite number of saves. The Dreamcast can't do that. So to that effect, Sega created this. This is the 4X memory card, which boasts having 800 blocks, which it technically does, just not at the same time. This memory card, which is an official Sega product, has these 4 like light-looking deals on top because they are orange LEDs once you, or I don't know if they're LEDs specifically, but point is when you turn them on, they turn orange. It does not have a screen, and it has a plastic button. So basically, if you pop this in, it will pop up to controller port number, or light port number 1, and then it shows that you have a memory card, and it's just 200 blocks. How do you access the rest? You press this button, and then it cycles over to the next card, which has its own 200. Next one, another 200. Next one, another 200. But you can't have one card with like 800. And the reason that matters is that's effectively how the VM2 works. It too cannot have infinite storage on a single card, but you effectively can have infinite cards. Now, I do want to address this as a matter of technicality. There is additional memory that Sega put in these that they never used. It's now referred to as the infamous 41 additional blocks. Basically, Sega left some space in there in case they ever needed to do updates or something, but they never got around to using it. People figured out they could unlock those blocks, and by that you would reach 241 blocks per card, which sounds nice. It sounds like, hey, additional space, that's great. And while that is technically true, it was later determined that a lot of games get confused by that because the system is only really supposed to have 200. So as a result, sometimes games will have compatibility issues. Now, I only bring that up because technically the VM2 offers that as a feature. It says it like right in the GUI that you can enable the additional 41 blocks. I recommend you do not do that because it only creates potential for compatibility problems while simultaneously is being really unimportant since you're going to effectively have infinite free cards on this thing anyway. There's really no reason to squeeze an extra 41 blocks out of each card. Okay, now, with all of that said, and hopefully you're all on the same page here, it's time to really kind of dive into this thing. Let's go ahead and unbox it here. So, this is my first time actually seeing one of these in person, believe it or not. I should also mention, these things are handmade by one guy who designed the entire thing. That would be Chris. But yeah, he did 100% of the work here. He included this little tool of some kind. I'm not really sure what this is for, but there's a little, like, I don't know if that's for resetting stuff. Anyway, I'm going to keep that with it unless I otherwise need it. I imagine it's to open it or something. Oh, there's a little reset button there. That's probably what that is. Anyway, that's probably just for emergencies or whatever. Okay. The weight to this is good. It feels about the same as the original as far as weight, maybe a little heavier. It is worth noting, of course, the battery is obviously what's different. The number one thing, there's many differences, but that's the number one, is the battery is a lithium-ion battery. So modern tech, and is, of course, USB-C charged. So the lifespan on that is substantially longer and rechargeable, which, of course, these were not. Now, cosmetically speaking, they're designed to look very, very similar. They're about exactly the same height and dimensions and everything. The lids, the original lid is famous for being kind of loose and just popping off. In fact, it's kind of hard to find one that still has that. The VM2 one, though, is, I read online that it's kind of tough to get it off there, and that's not a joke, apparently. Okay, there we go. I guess clip it from the side and pull up. But yeah, yeah, I think that's just going to take some time. Yeah, now it's coming off more easily. I think you just have to do it a couple times to get used to it. Okay, cool. So no problem there. Now, it says Dreamcast, but the logo is altered. This is a Sega requirement. I can tell you this one firsthand. I've worked with Sega quite a bit in the past. They're very cool with the whole Dreamcast indie scene. They don't have a problem with it. The only thing they've ever taken issue with is when people actually use the legitimate Dreamcast logo. Not so much because they actually personally have an issue with it, but just because it then to people who are not informed, it looks like a Sega officially licensed product that they had nothing to do with, which makes them potentially legally liable if somebody, like if the VM2 exploded or something horrible happened and had official Dreamcast logos all over it. Sega, debatably some person with a lawyer would be like, Sega did this to me, and then Sega has to be like, oh, we had nothing to do with it. So they basically tell everybody, here's the agreement. You guys can do whatever you want. We won't come after you, but your logo cannot be ours. You have to modify it in some way. It cannot be official. So to that end, the Dreamcast spiral has been slightly turned, and that's sufficient enough for everybody to be happy. So you see Dreamcast, the altered logo, and the words VM2. Now, the screen size is slightly different. It's a wider screen and has less data information at the top and the bottom. Now, the reason for this is Sega designed this screen specifically for an exact cutout within the controller. Now, as I understand it, talking to Chris, he could not get a screen exactly that size. It wasn't doable. So he got the closest one he could that didn't lose any data information as far as like being too big for the controller. So the end result is you effectively technically have a wider screen, but the top and the bottom is essentially cropped, which is only really matters when you put it in the controller and you recognize that you see some of the plastic of this kind of popping through. But honestly, it's such an insignificant amount that I don't think anybody would really be bothered by it, but it is worth noting. So on the bottom, you have here's an alteration for sure. You have the USB-C port, and then you have the one physical button that allows it to power cycle, or not power cycle, but basically cycle between different menu functionalities and stuff. That, like I said, I'll tinker with that. I obviously haven't used it yet, but I'll look at it in a bit. But the only thing you actually lose, there's only one feature on this you actually lose. And that is the keychain function. So this little white piece of plastic down here, this little ring, technically what you could do, you could either put a keychain through there, because the idea was, again, Sega wanted these things to be portable and people just walking around with them, or you put it on like, a lanyard or something like that. That was part of that idea. That obviously does not exist on the VM2. However, I can understand why, because it's never going to make this trendy. It's too late for that. So I get that one. And on the side here, you have your micro SD card slot, which requires formatting and setting up. So I'm going to go do all that stuff in a bit here. But at first, yeah, that's it. Okay, so I've been using this thing for a while now, and it's time for final thoughts. There's quite a bit to say here, so just kind of relax and enjoy. All right, so after the bit you saw before, I basically took this thing into my computer and decided, okay, let's hook it up and do the firmware updates and all that fun stuff. Honestly, very simple process. So it's got a USB-C port on the bottom, as mentioned before. You connect that to your computer. This thing will turn on, and it'll show on the screen. It'll be like, yo, dog, do you want me to connect to the computer? And you basically start file transfer mode, GUI mode, whatever. Say yes. Meanwhile, on the computer itself, you need to go to Chris's website, which is dreammods.net. And if you can't remember that, just like I couldn't, you just Google VM2 Dreamcast, and the first result is the same website, and you just download the file. What you'll end up with is a basic zip file. You open that up, and inside it's got two files. One is a series of instructions in a PDF form, and the other is the GUI file, which is just a Windows executable. You can technically launch this from inside the zip file, although I recommend not doing that. I would take the GUI file and move it to a folder somewhere on your Windows ecosystem, preferably in a place of your choosing that you remember and you named correctly, whatever, called VM2, it doesn't matter, whatever you like, somewhere where you know it will be. And the reason I recommend that is because that software will inevitably need to be updated, and if you have it in its own folder, it can just update in that folder and you never have to worry about it again. Okay, so that's what I would recommend. Now, once this is connected and that's there, you launch the GUI file and it pops up and it's like, yo, what's up? And it connects to this thing, it sees it's there. And so it automatically will sync the time and date based on your time zone on the configuration of your computer, which is the first thing it just automatically does. Yay. Then it says, okay, it checks the firmware and it's like, oh, dude, you need a firmware update. Cool. So you go ahead and tell it to firmware update, which is a pretty simple process, honestly, just a lot of follow the instructions. The only thing that's kind of notable in there, you get to see the changelog and all that fun stuff, but the only thing that's actually notable in there, honestly, is that it's like, oh, while I'm updating, I need you to hold down the mode button so I can start doing that. Let me know when you've done that. So the mode button it's referring to is on the VM2. Again, simple. And then as soon as it starts updating, you can let go, and the whole thing takes like a minute. After that, you can update the GUI itself, and bada bing, bada boom, you're done. So that GUI file is interesting if you are the type of person who wants to put files specifically on this card that you grabbed off the internet or that you have archived for whatever reason, or if you have a whole bunch of different VMUs laying around and you want to try and organize the files. It's going to be way easier to do that with that utility. I'm not going over that whole thing, but it is there. You can tinker. It's also useful for streaming and all sorts of other stuff. There's a lot of features there. Now, when it comes to the micro SD card, I think I put a 16 gigabyte card in there. I formatted it FAT32, and I just put it in there totally blank. It did the rest. There's really nothing else to it, and then you never really ever have to touch it again. So that's honestly all there is to that. So that's all set up. Now, let's go ahead and actually talk about the experience beyond that point. Once that was all done, I just left it in the USB-C port so that it could finish charging. There is a little battery indication up on the upper right corner that indicates it is charging. You'll know it's completely done when it switches over to the letter F out of nowhere, and that means it's fully charged. Good, you're done, you can use it now. It's always best to charge a lithium-ion battery all the way through before actually using it regularly. Okay. Then you sit down and you've got your VM2. What are we doing here? So let's talk about the features. Now I want to boot it up, so just kind of press a button and fire this thing up here. There we go. It beeped. I don't know if you heard that or not, but it beeped. The irony of that is this is a side point. The beep is a feature. You can turn it on or off. And I think it's an incredibly ironic feature because everyone and their mother who plays the Dreamcast, when they turn it on, they hear that beep, and they're like, oh, I'm nostalgic for the beep. Do you know what the beep actually means? It means that your VMU's battery is dead and needs to be replaced. So the irony of this thing voluntarily doing it is, it's so funny. But it's completely optional. You can turn it off. Actually, by default, it is off. But apparently a lot of people are just like, but I want it to beep when I turn it on. So you can do that. Anywho, so when you get that, you're prompted with this menu that says DC Visual Memory 2. It is the sequel, the evolution. Now within that, there's a few different features, right? So you have, let's start at the top here. You have, the first one is a little folder. It's the same original options that for anybody who's old enough to have ever remembered this or seen it when it actually happened. There were menu options on the original VMU for the 10 minutes that you had the thing running. The first one was about game data, so you can see the number of game files you have, the blocks usage. Technically, this is data management, but it is a horrible way to do it, so I would just ignore that outright. Then you have... it says free game, for example, is 190 blocks, and you have 128 or something. I don't know. But anyway, that doesn't matter. Sonic Adventure, for example, is there. So it knows, but that's not what we're doing here. All right, let me get back to the main menu there. The next one up is the little game icon, which I believe is a spade, kind of like a deck of cards. If I had like the Sonic Adventure minigame, the Chow game, or the Power Stone minigame on there, they would run. Those are also games you can grab off the internet and just throw on there with the GUI file. There's also a bunch of indie games and homebrew games and stuff that actually were made for this too, by the way, that work on there. And so, we don't need that one. But then the next one is clock settings. Again, this is totally unnecessary because when you connect to the computer, it'll do that for you. But it's technically there to make it feel OG. Now, none of that really matters. So we're going to focus on the ones that do. And to do that, there's a little button on the bottom. You click that and you get into the VM2 specific settings. That's what we're going to focus on here. Now, in there, you'll see a little Sonic mascot, which is nice. On the right, you'll see your battery, and you'll see an SD card, provided you've attached one, etc. Which, duh, you should have. So we're going to focus first on memory. Now, A is confirmed, B is back. So we press A, and you'll have three options. There's internal. Now, what that means is Chris put a stock, just 200 blocks of memory in this thing for the exact purpose of running it as a VMU. In the event you don't have an SD card, this thing, even at its most basic level, will still function as a VMU. But it's not really the way to go about doing it. You obviously want to use the SD card. So you click on that, and that's what it defaults to. So it's just, okay. And then within that, there's a whole bunch of settings for creating a new file if you want to do stuff like that manually, or just managing the ones you already have, etc., etc. The next thing up is called Game ID, and this is an option, but I highly recommend checking it. We need to stop and talk about Game ID. Game ID is the basic idea that because these VMUs, or any of these memory cards, like even for other systems, there's like PS2, GameCube, stuff like that, they all have these that are using micro SD cards now. They all basically work the same way, where they want to have like essentially infinite cards, but they have to cycle between cards. And in practical terms, if you thought about what it would actually look like to have like 1,000 different memory cards in front of you and trying to find the individual one you need, that would be ridiculous. So they try to make that easier for you by having the VMU, in this case, detect the game and then auto cycle to the correct memory card. So the core idea is if I put in, say, Sonic Adventure, it will just generate an entirely new memory card just for Sonic Adventure. Then if I go off and play Power Stone, and then I play Shenmue, and then I play, Crazy Taxi or whatever it all is, it generates a new card for each one of those games. Then as soon as I come back to Sonic Adventure, it's like, oh, wait, you already have one for that. Let me go grab that card, pull that right back up. And you as the end user, just as far as you're concerned, are just seamlessly hopping between games, and you never run out of storage because no one game is going to take every single bit of storage on that individual card. That's the core idea. Now, I would consider it essential. It's quality of life for sure. You can technically manually cycle between cards, and that's where things like the GUI come in to make it a little bit easier to kind of data manage. But yeah, it's not strictly a requirement. And I bring that up because the system is not perfect. Basically, the game ID works because the Dreamcast is supposed to send some sort of data to the VMU. The problem is Sega didn't build it to do that. It never sends a signal to the VMU telling you what individual games are what. It just writes kind of generically. So because the Dreamcast itself has no stock way of doing it, you need some other thing to do it. Now, ODEs, for example, things like the GDMU, the mode, the USB GD, etc., could theoretically do that for you because there are additional things that can be updated and added and supported. So the GDMU is the perfect example. For that, a piece of software was called OpenMenu was created that is made cross-compatible with the VM2. Again, cross-compatibility, they like to help each other out, and they make each other work. That way, if you have the GDMU and that software and the VM2, 100% compatibility, it jumps seamlessly from game to game to game to game to game. However, other ODEs didn't necessarily play along. I don't know if the USB GD or whatever is even supported anymore. I haven't heard anything about that one in years since there was like that ticking time bomb issue in it. Whatever, that was years ago. But I know for sure the mode, which was made by Terra Onion and hasn't been updated in the last couple of years, also has not updated for this thing, which is really unfortunate, and Terra Onion isn't too likely to do so. Therefore, it doesn't work with the game ID system. And Chris kind of saw this as a huge quality of life issue because he didn't want to sit there and be like, yeah, I've got this thing, it's great, but if you don't have a GDMU, and including if you have the original discs and the original drive, you basically are just forced to manually cycle and memorize, and it would be so tedious that your average user would just not be interested. So he took it upon himself to create his own game ID system that actually not only works with the unsupported ODEs, it also works with the original discs. However, his system is not perfect. At the time of this recording, it's got about 80% compatibility, so a game such as Sonic Adventure is compatible. So the process I described before would totally work, where you play it for a while, play other games, come back, and it loads the original card, and thus your original save works. However, if it's a game that is not considered supported, the games will still save. It's just that they save to a seemingly random card or an unassigned card. The Dreamcast can still recognize it. It just falls upon you to find that individual card within the data so that you play the game you want to continue. That's sort of a flaw, but I can't really knock him because it's still an actively ongoing process. It is a work in progress. The goal is to get 100% compatibility. In fact, he's also working on getting other compatibility. I didn't even realize it, but I accidentally was helping with getting the independent Dreamcast games added. Talking to my boy Razor, who's in my Discord. He's like a sentient brain. He's beyond genius. It's actually like we're all like chimps throwing our feces at each other compared to this dude. He's just super genius. Anyway, so that guy and I were going back and forth on what the full list of independent Dreamcast games is. And when I say full list of that, I mean the ones that get pressed discs that I make videos on, not like homebrew. So through that, we were trying to get all the game IDs. That way, when they do another firmware update, those games as well get individual cards, etc. The goal is to do that. The problem is Chris is a one-man operation. He makes the box, he makes the packaging, he ships these things out, he does all the firmware updates. He also has to individually test every single game for game IDs. it's just a lot in addition to, like, you know, also living his life. So yeah, there isn't a team of people working on it. The point is, that's getting updated. Okay. I also asked him, by the way, like, what else we can look forward to in those type of updates. There's other features he's working on. The thing is, it's kind of a community effort project because there's individual games that did individual things with the VMU that Chris was simply not aware of. And so once the community tells him, he's like, oh, okay, I'll add that to the list of goals and objectives. I know there's some Phantasy Star Online updates and things that are coming for this, etc. But yeah, basically the dude is on it. And at the moment in which I make this video, it's very, very good. And any game that is just simply not compatible with the game ID will theoretically get there. I even asked him about Dreamcast. For those who don't know, Bleem was a company in the 90s who basically, or late 90s more accurately, who made an emulator for the basically PlayStation emulation on PC. And then they took that concept to the Dreamcast and called it Bleemcast. And the idea was to play PlayStation 1 games on the Dreamcast with their stuff. They only ended up making 3 official releases. One is Gran Turismo 2, one is Metal Gear Solid, and the third is Tekken 3. Now, those discs will warn you 1,000 times over before you use them that the VMU's standard system is not compatible and must be completely reformatted. So basically any sort of VMU you used or memory card you used on Bleemcast had to be dedicated to those. So I asked him straight up, like, what would happen over here? And he's like, I don't know. I never tried it. It's like, okay. He said, I will add it to the list of goals. And because he said that, I'm like, well, I'm not going to stick mine in there and see what it does. I'll just leave it alone for now. So Bleemcast support presumably is coming. Bleemcast is its own anomaly because, like, most ODEs don't even support it either. It's just so different. But anyway, theoretically, that's coming as well. Okay, now with that understanding, let's continue on here. That's what Game ID is, and that's why it's so important, and that's why I'm glad he's still updating it. So the next setting here, we got screen. So you have a backlight, you have resolution options, and you have ghosting. So backlight, these are basically, do you want the modern features or do you want it to look like an old VMU? Basically, I keep every single one of these on. I don't know why you would turn the backlight off other than battery consumption. Resolution, you have 1x or 2x. Just leave it at 2x. There's no reason to make it worse. And then there's ghosting because a lot of people kind of like the old image of the way the Dreamcast did it. For nostalgic reasons, I do not, so I leave it better. Then there's buzzer. So there's sound enables. There's a speaker on the back, and you know it can make some sound here and there. The next one is the startup beep. That's what you guys heard before. By default, it's not on. I turn it on for exactly that. That's where the stupid nostalgia reason comes in for me, even though, again, ironically, it just means your battery is dead in the original version. And then there's a perform test function, which is fun. Which is Green Hill Zone from Sonic. Why he picked a Genesis one as opposed to a Dreamcast one, I'm not sure, but I assume it was just because it was easier for chiptune reasons or whatever it is. Okay, after you go with buzzer, you have system information, game speed. When it says, this is a little misleading because it sounds like it has something to do with the actual game. It doesn't. Game speed is a reference to overclocking this device so that the VMU games like the Power Stone game or whatever run at 2x. It's kind of, you could do it. It's not really, there's no real reason to. So I would leave it off and just leave it at 1x. VMU region. You will see a flag looking thing that looks like a cross, almost like the Finnish flag. And then you'll see, if you cycle, you'll see one with like a little star looking deal in the middle, or it's more like a diamond. Basically, the first one is sort of meant to represent the Union Jack and thus mean English. And the second one is meant to look like the Rising Sun, the Japanese flag, and represent the language of Japanese. If you are watching this video in English and understand English, guess which one you should keep it on. Okay, and then there's GUI mode if you want to force it into communication with the PC after, and it just didn't work for some reason. Okay, then there's the About feature, which really just tells you your firmware and serial number. There's really nothing else there. So that is the VM2. Now, if you want to turn it off, you can actually hold down the mode button for, I believe it's like 5 to 10 seconds, and it'll just shut off. Alternatively, if you don't do that, it will eventually just shut off on its own. So let's talk about some additional compatibility. So I didn't have any issues playing with it. It seemed to seamlessly kind of work with everything that was stated on the compatibility list, and I tested some indies and everything, and like I said, they just kind of populated in their own random folder somewhere. So personally, before I decided to really deep dive on this thing, I would want Game ID to be further expanded, but since Chris is already on it, there's not really much else to say there. So the only other thing you can really talk about is hardware compatibility. compatibility. I used a mode primarily and had no issues. I tried it with a disc-based console and I had no issues. I didn't even have an issue switching between mode and disc-based and having the memory card still work. It recognized the same game, which you would expect it to, but I don't know, technically somebody might think that might be an issue. The one issue that does come up, and it's not his fault, is controller compatibility. So he built this around the OEM controller. Granted, this is a Japanese, like, transparent one. I think they called it, like, Midnight Sparkle or something. I don't know, it had some weird name like that. But yeah, it worked just fine with the OEM controllers. It also works fine with the Retro Fighters controller, the wired one. That's actually where I got a lot of my footage with, because that's what I was primarily playing with, just to test it out. But those two work. There's other third-party controllers where it may work. Keep in mind the Dreamcast had a ton of controller options, and I would assume a lot of them do work, at least the wired ones. Where you get into issues is the wireless stuff. I actually, ironically, did not test it with the Dreamcon, Chris's own controller, but I would imagine that works, and if it doesn't, it's probably because mine was a prototype that would need some sort of firmware update. But yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to that one. But the other wireless controllers, things like the Retro Fighters wireless controller or the D6, etc., those do not work. And the reason they don't work is not actually the fault of this thing. It's a fault of the way that those controllers were made. However, they can theoretically be firmware updated to support this. And according to Chris, he's in talks with Retro Fighters to make that happen. So that support may be coming down the line. Now, I don't know if Retrobit's ever going to release their controller or anything like that, and if it would support, who knows. But it's a possibility. But basically, where I stand on this thing is I think it's phenomenal, and I think that it's, as long as you continue to do the firmware updates, that you really have a solid product here. Especially games, I cannot stress the value of Game ID. I really can't. Because essentially, with that functional, this one card replaces all the other cards. It's perfect. It cycles flawlessly between games. You'll never run out of storage space, like, ever. And you'll never have to really deal with anything. It makes the quality of life of the Dreamcast experience even better. Not to mention it has, like, you know, the bright screen and all that sort of stuff, largely fulfilling the unrealized promise of Sega and the actual VMU. So now I have to bring up the unpleasantness, which is inevitably people will bring this up. What about the VMU Pro that 8-Bit Mods is doing? Now, that, at the time I record this, does not exist. It's a prototype. I don't have one. I can't speak to it personally. It has some pretty neat looking features, etc. It's got a little bit of handheld emulation. It looks like for Master System specifically. But yeah, without actually using it, I can't really say what the differences are or aren't. But what I can say is this exists here now in our physical reality. It's been out for a while, and it continues to get updated and is a pretty solid experience. So I'm very happy with this, and a huge shout out to Chris, because honestly, it's really hard to go back to a stock VMU after using this, just because this really truly is like everything you would ever need all in one card. The only sort of criticism I have, and it's not his fault because it's not like Sega did it any better, is the lids. Unfortunately, that was like one of the biggest problems with the original VMU, is people lose these. And he didn't come up with any sort of way that, like, maybe it could attach on the bottom or something. Like a way to connect it somewhere else that I don't put it on a counter and just forget about it. Granted, that's up to me to be responsible as an adult. But I don't know. That's like the one downside that I guess I would theoretically criticize. If you were going to do these again, maybe a slight redesign so it's theoretically possible to attach that from the bottom when it's inserted in the controller, or something to that effect. I don't know. But beyond that, I got really nothing else bad to say about it. So I'm looking forward to firmware updates as they come. It'll be good. So thank you very much to Chris, and thank you guys very much for watching. Also, thank you to Razor again for my Discord, because not only did he do a lot of legwork, he actually kind of reconnected Chris and I, and that's how this came to be. So thank you, Razor. And thank you guys very much for watching. You guys can do me a favor. Please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description. I got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel, etc. I appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.